Okay, just remember to do this, Dee Dee. There's a 7-second delay. Hi friends, so we thought we would drop in and talk about Glenn Greenwald and his recent addition to some other kinds of what one would call questioningly transphobic. That's being kind. His different his posts recently on Twitter, and he did a video defending himself, saying that he's not transphobic, that he is for trans rights, and we wanted to go through this video because he may feel like he is for trans rights, but he actually says some things that are really feeding into the whole TERF thing, the whole unfortunate TERF narratives, and he doesn't seem to feel the need to interview a trans person, which is so often the case with people who push TERF narratives. That's trans exclusionary radical feminists. We don't consider them feminists, but he's actually...
We just call them transphobic women.
Did you turn your microphone on?
I did.
Oh, great. Yeah, so I have Dee Dee here. Dee Dee's the one that's going to be talking about this. But unfortunately, often is the case that people such as Glenn Greenwald or Joe Rogan and people like that, they don't interview trans people and give that perspective. They turn to TERFs, that's trans exclusionary radical feminists. We just call them transphobic women. And they turn to those people to give their warped perspective. So that, to me, is a red flag.
In the case of Glenn, we just call him a transphobe.
And that is a red flag right there when people go to TERFs first to talk about this issue. Anyway, so we were going to... Hi, Holly.
I want to just say a couple of things introductory.
Sure. Go for it, Dee Dee.
The whole thing is that Glenn Greenwald has been putting out... He did a free speech article a couple of months ago, was it? About Alison Schreier.
Yeah.
And her...
she's an author.
She's an author of an horribly transphobic book, and he was carrying on about how terrible the ACLU was, and how, because they considered this transphobic, and how she's being cancelled. I have real problems with these notions that J.K. Rowling or Alison Schreier has been cancelled, because what have they been cancelled from? I mean, in Schreier's case, she was actually told the publishing house she tried to have it published in her book first said they wouldn't publish it. She found another publishing house. It's been sold and is still sold on Amazon and around the place. Amazon, she wanted to do a big advertising campaign on Amazon, and Amazon said, no, not really. I think they didn't really want to be promoting a very transphobic book in full advertising.
Yeah. Anyway,
so she's claimed it's canceling. She's been on Joe Rogan. She's been all around the place. She's been interviewed by numerous mainstream media. The same with J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling has had her views put out everywhere, interview after interview. Has there been, with either Schreier or Rowling, have they interviewed any trans people to say what they think of those things? No. Has anybody done any investigation as to what they've actually said? No.
Anyway,
They
Glenn
just talk
Greenwald.
about how horrible the canceling is.
So Glenn Greenwald has been on. We're going to play some of this video shortly, but
Yeah.
we just wanted to talk quickly about this. So Glenn Greenwald has been on Joe Rogan, and he said some questionable things. Joe Rogan is a known transphobe over and over again. It's like he cannot miss an opportunity, and even if there isn't an opportunity, he manages to inject transphobia into conversations. He tried to get Edward Snowden, tried to rope Edward Snowden in on his transphobic argument, and Edward Snowden said, "Is this the hill you want to die on, Joe?" Anyway, so Glenn Greenwald has also elevated Shreya in one of his articles, sort of saying that she's being censored. I don't know why he picked that. There's so many things that he could have pulled out that people are being censored, or groups are being censored. No, he picks out a major turf that's really hateful and has got so much ridiculous nonsense, isn't it, Didi, about trans people.
Yeah.
He chooses that woman to elevate, and this
She
is where...
talks about irrevocable damage. Her whole book is really about how young girls are being, brainwashed and convinced that they're trans, and then have irrevocable damage and horrible surgeries, and it's all because of this trans trend.
Yeah.
And she's one of the forces behind the recent UK decision to make letting young trans people have hormone blockers very much different. At this point, it's really hard to get hormone blockers for any young person in the UK. And we'll talk more about this. I want to first play this little bit about Greenwald. Are you ready, Trish?
Hold on a sec. I was just tweeting out this, so people want to join in, they can. Just hold on a sec. And if you can't hear this Glenn Greenwald video that he's made just recently, let us know if it's too low.
I won't be able to see the chat on these
high.
things. So,
yeah. If it's too low or it's too high, whichever way, if you wouldn't mind letting us know. Just hold on, I actually have to find where we are now. I've lost the... Okay, just hold on.
Okay.
So we'll just play a little bit of this, and then Didi will make a comment on this.
Okay. Who have we got here? Hi, Holly.
Hi, Jera.
And Holly and Jera both here?
Hola.
Hola.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Didi will play this.
Okay, so we'll play some Greenwald here.
Don't forget, Didi.
Gradations. There's no bringing people along or engaging them or saying, well, I'm glad that you believe this 70% of what we think. Now let me talk to you about why the other 30% is something that you ought to change your mind about too. It's instant declaration and villainization and demonization as their enemy, which is why I, despite those views I just laid out, which I genuinely believe, and I think most people know that I would not affirm them if I didn't believe them, despite having those views, was nonetheless repeatedly accused of being a TERF, which is a trans radical, a trans exclusionary radical feminist. I don't think anyone can call me a radical feminist, but even the concept of trans exclusionary, from where do I seek to exclude trans people? From what legal right or societal sector do I seek to exclude? None. And yet that term just gets applied by a mob that ceases to think critically or independently. A lot of it is opportunistic, as I said, people who just serve as...
Didi, have you turned your mic on?
I'll stop there.
Your mic.
Yeah, I've got my mic on now.
Great. Sorry, we have some technical issues we have to sort out with, so I can hear the video. Didi has to turn her mic off, so she may...
So I have to remember to turn it back on.
Yeah, she has to turn her mic on and off. Sorry about that.
Okay. Now, I've skipped ahead the first 13 minutes because basically he's just talking about what a wonderful person he is and how he's gay and how he loves trans people and all that sort of stuff.
And that he's
how he's not a transphobe.
That if he was transphobic, he wouldn't be saying...
And here at the end of this, he just said, and where have I ever, supported any kind of action that would harm trans people or any kind of diminishing of their rights or whatever.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's supporting these notions, later on you'll hear in this, he again questions whether young trans people are able to consent to these trans things. Do they have the understanding to consent to these various things? And this is, of course, he's also promoted Schreier. Schreier has been saying these poor young trans girls or young girls have been convinced that they're trans and irrevocable damage is being done. And he's sort of supported her. He's highlighted her. He's yet another person who said, oh, Schreier, and talks about her arguments without talking about anything on the other side. And the consequence of these arguments is that young people have been deprived of hormone blockers. Now, what that means, these people will argue that irrevocable damage because irrevocable change could happen if people have cross-gender hormones and surgery. Okay, surgery is definitely irrevocable change, so are cross-gender hormones. But cross-gender hormones are not available to young people. In fact, before a child hits puberty, there is no medical treatment at all given to children. The only transition they may have is social transition. And after that, because there's already been this argument that a young person can't possibly know that they're trans, even if they've persistently, consistently, and insistently said they were trans from a very young age, like 3, 4, 5, they say, until you're 16, you can't really know. And so they've said you cannot have cross-gender hormones. And the only thing, but they have acknowledged you can have hormone blockers. Now, the reason you have hormone blockers is to avoid irrevocable damage. Because if you are trans, then going through puberty causes all kinds of physical changes that some of those things you may be able to undo, other things you won't be able to undo. Some things will require surgery and so on to try and make it right. But if you don't have to go through a puberty as the wrong gender, then you don't have to make those changes. And that's the whole point. This is the whole reason that young people are given hormone blockers.
Yeah.
That's so that they don't go through irrevocable changes. And the reason they don't let them, they use hormone blockers is because they won't acknowledge that a young person might know their own mind. And this is in spite of the fact that in many jurisdictions, Australia and I believe the UK, the age of consent for medical procedures for young people is actually around 12. Young people can say they do not want or they do want certain medical procedures in spite of their parents. And there are usually tests, like there is a procedure for testing. In fact, in Australia, the age of consent for medical procedure is based on these competency tests to see whether you understand the consequences of your decision. And if you understand, then you are deemed to be competent to make those decisions yourself. Now, the age of 16 in Australia, which is when you might be able to get cross-gender hormones generally, is set because in Australia, 16 is the age at which your parents can say, we no longer have any responsibility for you. For a long time in Australia, it's been the age where people can decide to get married. It's been an age of consent for many things. It's an age where a child can decide to leave school and go to work. Children have a number of rights from the age of 16. And in particular, where parents are hostile to the idea of being trans, it's unlikely a child is going to be able to get hormone blockers. There's always the issue of, can a child get hormone blockers? I mean, the procedure, doctors don't generally just hand them out like candy.
Yeah.
You usually have to go through some sort of psychological assessment. And this isn't required necessarily by law, but most doctors require it because they don't want to be held liable. And no surgeon will generally operate on any child or any person until they're at least 18, and often later than that.
Yeah.
Usually you have to go through various psychological things. You have to have letters from psychiatrists and that sort of thing to say that you are stable,
Yeah.
to say that this is what you really want, that you are not likely to change your mind, and so on. And this has been the case for surgeons, since the very early days.
Yeah. So Glenn, my impression of what Glenn Greenwald was saying in this video is that he feels like social pressure and pressure from psychologists is creating trans people. This is what he's kind of putting out there, and as if everybody's playing loose and fast. You know what I mean? That's one of the ideas that he seems to be putting forward.
This is what people like Alison Schreier say.
Yeah.
And this is a line that you hear from a lot of transphobic people, particularly in the UK. They've used this line a lot, that this is all a trend, Schreier.
And that there's trans activists that are actually like the trans agenda. This is the same sort of shit in a way. The trans agenda. Just like there was the gay agenda.
Yeah.
Now it's the trans agenda. But
now
anyway, please continue.
Yes, that there are people, or as our Prime Minister called them, gender whisperers.
Yeah, gender whisperers. Anyway, did you want to play another part of that, or did you? Let's go through it.
Okay, I'll play another little bit.
Did you have anything else to say with that?
Just with
he
this
said he didn't want to hurt anybody. He doesn't want to.
Just with this whole notion of, I mean, I think Glenn Greenwald hasn't informed himself at all.
No.
For him to think that children could get irrevocable surgery is just kind of wrong.
That's the kind of thing that J.K. Rowling puts out there. These people never ever interview trans people about this. People that are knowledgeable about it. No, they just pull these things out from people that are like TERFs.
There's quite a good piece done by a cognitive psychologist, Cass Harris, where she takes apart Alison Schreier's book for its methodological faults, as well as the falsity, the lack of any kind of truth in what she says.
I'll find that.
A lot of what these TERFs say, I'll use TERFs, I'm sorry, a lot of what these transphobes say is based on, for instance, Abigail Schreier talked about a study for sudden onset dysphoria and this is a term they use to make it sound more scientific. And what that was a study of people who came to 3 sites which were already transphobic, and they talked to the parents of people who said, my child has claimed to be trans and I think they're really not. And they interviewed those people, and on the basis of those interviews, they've decided there's this sudden onset dysphoria.
Yeah.
And they haven't talked to people in general. They haven't talked to the parents of trans children.
Yeah.
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 They haven't talked to any trans children. They haven't talked to people like when our Prime Minister did that gender whisperer thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was some interviews with Elizabeth Riley,
Yeah.
who's been working for years,
Yeah.
20 years with transgender children, or children with gender issues. And she pointed out that a lot of these kids get referred to her because the parents think that they may be trans. And she said the schools do not do that. It's the parents who usually inform the schools.
Yeah.
The schools then might contact her or get the parents to contact her. She won't talk to the children without the parents.
Yeah.
And she sees a number of people. And she said the majority of the people she sees, actually they come to the conclusion that those children are not trans.
Yeah.
For one reason or other, they just like dressing up in this, or playing with these toys, or playing sports, or not playing sports, or whatever.
Yeah.
And after, some actual investigation, a lot of them decide, no, they just want to do these other things. They're not actually trans. So it's important to understand that when somebody's referred to somebody, it doesn't mean that they automatically go on hormones.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an important point, and put a pin in that because it comes up later.
Yeah, but I was going to say that it's interesting, though, of all Glenn Greenwald, this is not usually his wheelhouse, as you might say. He's always doing things, he does a lot of stuff about, politics, and for some reason, I'm not sure why, he's decided that this is one hill that he wants to die on, basically. This is sort of like, this has come out of left field, this whole move. I don't know why, but, I sometimes wonder if he even has any self-knowledge about, really, is he, okay with trans people? Because this sort of pushing these turfs is not the sort of thing that one does when one is for trans people. But anyway,
a lot of this is kind of similar in some ways to the arguments that white nationalists or people who believe in a white ethno-state say. They believe they're not white nationalists, they're not racist, they just believe that everybody should be able to have a state with their own people, and so they want a white ethno-state. And they believe that, they say, well, maybe we don't believe, we're not white supremacists, we think maybe Asian people are more intelligent. And they make these excuses, but in fact they're fascists. Scratch the surface a little bit, and they're out there with their tiki torches.
It's because they
calling blood and land.
There's always a very thin veneer, a very thin excuse, and underneath it is like when the whole thing about when the gay marriage thing came up, the marriage equality. They were always going on about, but it's about the definition of marriage. No,
we don't hate gay people. We just don't think they should be able to get married.
Well, but it was about the definition of marriage, and they kept on going on about it being about the definition of marriage, but it wasn't. It was really that they really didn't like gay people.
And then some of the transphobes carried on about pedophilia and gender whisperers and boys in dresses.
No, but I'm just making a point, that those excuses are always, they're not
excuses.
they're not
And
Diddy, they're not courageous.
yeah,
Diddy, they're not courageous enough to just say that they hate gay people or that they hate trans people.
Yeah.
They find really poor excuses that they keep going on and on about.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Holly says, I've known people through transition, very sweet people.
Yeah.
And Jera said, I don't understand all the deniers.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
shall we play some more of
We'll
this?
play a little bit more.
Diddy, don't forget to turn your microphone off.
Yeah, I won't forget to turn the mic off. Thank you for reminding me.
And a huge explosion, even bigger, in the number of people who identify as transgender. The lesbian and gay increases are very small, pretty much what you would expect given increased societal acceptance. So 0.7% of Gen Xers identify as lesbian, 1.4% of Gen Zs identify as lesbian. It's basically doubled from 0.7 to 1.4, a pretty mild increase. Gay is even a little bit less, 1.2% of Gen Xers identify as being gay men, 2.1% of Gen Z, so slightly less than half. That's the increase in lesbian and gay. Obviously, that doesn't account for a fourfold increase. What really has exploded are the percentages of people identifying as bisexual. So from Gen X, you have 1.8% of people identifying as bisexual, and in Gen Z, 11.5%. 11.5%. It is an increase of 7 times the number. 7 times the number in that short time. The trans increase is even starker. Only 0.2% of Gen Xers identified as trans. 1.8% of Gen Z people identify as trans. That is an increase of a 9-fold increase in the number of people. So you not only have a huge explosion in the number of people identifying as LGBT in general, almost 1 out of 5 of this latest generation, 1 out of 5, but the percentage is that increase is due almost entirely to a huge increase in the number of people identifying not as gay or lesbian, but as bi and trans. Now, of course, we ought to ask why that is. That's fascinating to understand why that has happened.
Okay, now this is
Diddy, have you turned your mic on?
I have.
Oh, great. Okay.
I have, thank you.
Okay.
Now this is the latest uproar has happened because Glenn has brought up these issues, these studies in the Gallup poll, and this is what that is. And I would say a lot of people criticized what he said for the fact that it is a mistake in some senses, that he sees this as a change over time. It's not a change over time. It's a change within generations. All of these generations are existing here and now. Yeah. I'm a boomer from relatively the beginning of that. Trish is a boomer from near the end of that. Glenn is a Gen X person. And you can see the increases in on this graph. Can you see it there?
Kind of.
Yeah. So there's been a big increase in the number of people who identify as bi, depending on how old they are. It's not an increase with time. It's an increase relative to age. Mm. So one of the points he makes later. Let's see if I can get. He talks about the identification and the increased identification of people as LGBT as opposed to heterosexual or straight. And what is really interesting to me, where people before 1946, only 1.3% of the population identify as LGBT. And for people who are in Gen Z, nearly 16% of the people identify as LGBT in some way. What is interesting to me is the number of people in the no opinion category. For traditionalists before 1946, nearly 9% are saying they don't have any opinion about whether or not they're gay or straight. And I will say that I know for a fact, because being an older person, I've talked to other older people. And a lot of older people may live in rural communities and have a lot of older friends. And for older people, coming out publicly is still an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. That they may lose a lot of friends.
Yeah.
Even if socially it's more acceptable, it may not be so acceptable within their social group. So what we are seeing really here is that there is an increased happiness to declare yourself as LGBT for younger people. And he's especially fascinated by this
By lesbians and bi
by
people.
by this one.
And he puts bi
because of
people.
the-
Didi, somebody pointed out that he puts the word bi in quotes and he puts LGBT in quotes on
this
his
is
Twitter
in his Twitter thing.
timeline.
He-
That's funny.
This whole uproar happened because he took these things and talked about them
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with talking about the Gallup poll on Twitter. It's really interesting. It's some of his conclusions
Yeah.
that got him into trouble.
Yeah. This is definitely not his forte.
And this
he
is
should
not
keep-
his forte.
He should keep away from this issue altogether. Seriously and truly.
He noted that, the number of transgender people in Gen Z is higher than the number of lesbians, and he saw that as tying into the transphobic trope
Yes.
of lesbian erasure.
He's afraid
And
that
lesbian
lesbians...
erasure,
They're
interestingly,
afraid that lesbians are going to go extinct.
lesbians are going to disappear.
Yes, and that's what his turfy friend was saying on Twitter.
And a lot of transphobes, particularly the so-called feminist ones, have invented this a lesbian erasure thing, basically as a reaction to the fact that they were always carrying on about trans women and how dangerous trans women are, and how you can't let trans women, use bathrooms and so on because they're all rapists and so on. And people said, yeah, how come you never talk about trans men?
Yeah,
And that's been said for years,
yeah,
with the transphobes never mentioning trans men,
yeah.
because they didn't know really how to deal with it. Now they figured out a way to deal with it, and it's called lesbian erasure.
yeah,
That all of the lesbians are turning into trans men.
yeah.
Well, okay, Glenn Greenwald did a highlight.
Yes, they've
of-
actually swapped over now from going on about the bathroom issue now to this.
No, they
lesbian-
do both.
Oh, they do both, but
Like
I mean,
J.K. Rowling.
this is a new fad.
J.K. Rowling does all the.
But this is a
the
new
trans
fad, though.
women
This
thing.
has actually started to become a real thing, though.
Yeah.
The lesbian erasure thing.
Yeah.
You couldn't make this shit up, could you? Really?
You couldn't
Seriously.
make this up. I mean, it's
It's
been the
just
last few
sad.
years they've really been pushing this one. It's a way in and a way to explain trans men and demonize them too.
Yeah, go on.
Because I mean, really, would you want Buck Angel to walk into a woman's bathroom?
No.
I mean, I think the women would be horrified. They say, "What is this man doing in a woman's bathroom?"
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody like Natalie Wynn walked in, or Georgie Stone,
Yeah,
the
or
young
Cat
trans
Black.
girl in Australia,
Or Cat Black.
then, well,
Or
all
in
of
the-
those
or in the
people
younger-
do use women's bathroom.
That's right.
And nobody bats an eye,
No,
basically.
no.
And trans people have used women's bathroom for decades.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's sort of circled. He actually highlighted in yellow this, 1.4 percent lesbian and 1.8% transgender, and then tied it. He then posted an article about lesbian erasure, how trans people are destroying lesbian culture because all of the masculine masculine lesbians are becoming trans. And a lot of people pointed out that in fact, if you look at these figures, there are more people in Gen Z who identify as lesbian than in any earlier or older category. Yeah, as people get younger, more and more people are willing to identify as lesbian.
Yeah.
So there's no reduction in the number of lesbians.
No.
Yeah, and
So what is
certainly
his-
this figure,
So what is his problem then if there's no reduction in the amount of lesbians then?
well,
In
he
fact,
still
it's going
says
up.
he still cites these people like the woman whose article, I'm not going to refer to it because I don't want to give her any airtime.
Yeah.
Who's saying, lesbian culture is vanishing, the bars and all that kind of stuff because of trans people. And I don't know, I think gay and lesbian bars tend to be vanishing because older people don't tend to go to them too much because they feel like they're really old. And young people don't tend to do that sort of stuff so much anymore.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
bar scene is
Imagine blaming that on trans people, though. Of all the things that, there are
Yeah.
lots of reasons why
Yeah.
that could be.
yeah.
Because the way people engage and
The way people
socialize is
engage,
different. Is different now to what it used to be.
Many lesbians sort of logged into that Twitter thing and said, well, I'm a lesbian. I think I've got more support than ever.
Yeah.
You know, I see lesbians everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you've got a whole lot of people who are claiming to be who are saying and identifying as bisexual.
Anyway,
And that's fabulous.
Yeah.
What I see in this is that as people, as the culture changes, as people are more able to actually look at themselves and say, what is my sexuality, my sexual orientation really? Am I really fully straight?
Yeah.
Or am I really fully lesbian? And they say, well, no, not fully, and they're more willing to say, no, I'll identify as bisexual.
Yeah.
And identifying as bisexual is kind of still fairly brave because bi people get a lot of bad press,
Yeah, they do.
including in lesbian circles.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of lesbians who don't like bi people
Yeah.
because they figure, they're going to come in, get into a relationship, and then go off and get together with a man.
Yeah.
And that's
Anyway,
going to be the end of it.
We should probably move on. To
Okay, I just want to
oh yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah,
It's just I don't
talk
want
to
it
this
to.
a little
I don't
bit.
want it to be a 3-hour video.
Yeah. And I don't think it'll be that.
Okay.
And I think these are interesting
Yeah. Sure.
issues, and
Sure.
they are ones I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, so the increase in trans people, I think, too, like more people are willing to look at their gender and say, well, okay, like, sure, there's more acceptance, social acceptability for binary trans people. So there's going to be more binary trans people who will identify that way. But I'd say there's a whole lot more non-binary people.
Yeah.
And those are people who say, look, I don't want to say I'm male or female.
Yeah.
or I want to say I feel like this sometimes and this sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing in the middle and the breakdown of the rigidity. And that accounts for a lot more people saying that they're transgender. And another thing that's interesting is Glenn Greenwald compared lesbian to transgender, and it's worth noting that gender is not the same as sexual orientation.
Do you want to expand
And the
on
term
that?
transgender is an aggregated term. It's both trans men, trans women, and non-binary people. All three of those people are within that classification.
Yeah,
And a
yeah.
number of people pointed that out as well.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of them said that the way he highlighted it and tried to say that it's somehow taking away from lesbian people the fact that there are trans people, increasing numbers of trans people. They said that's transphobic.
Yeah.
And it's rubbish.
Yeah.
Because if there's a whole lot more bisexual and trans people, that's really at the expense of cishet people. It's not at the expense of lesbians, because there's even more people identifying as lesbian. Interestingly, there's not that same increase in the number of people who are identifying as gay. That big increase happened with millennials.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go back to Greenwald, yeah?
Yeah. Don't forget to turn your mic off, Didi.
Okay, now the next chunk I wanted to go to was I was just finding the right place.
For a fact, there are other causes. How do I know that? How do I know that there are other causes generating this increase? Well, because you can go online and listen to people who have said that they believed and concluded that they were trans. Young people speaking very intelligently and thoughtfully and articulately who concluded that they were trans, who started hormone therapy, who even went through anatomically altering irreversible surgeries to transition, who ultimately realized that they were not in fact trans. They were not in fact trans. And then they entered the phase of what they call detransitioning. And what many of them say, not all, some of them say, I detransitioned because I realized to be trans in the society was just too difficult. But many of them say, I detransitioned because I am not trans. So then the question arises, well, why did you conclude in the first place that you were trans? And many of them say, because the society encourages you to believe that. If you're struggling with a mental illness, so many mental health professionals now will immediately say, oh, well, maybe you're trans, and you're 16 or 17 or 18 or 20, and you listen to those suggestions. Of course, you're influenced by them.
Let's just talk a little bit about this.
Did you turn
I've got the mic on now.
Okay, yeah.
Let's just talk a little bit. I'm going to play pretty continuously his thing from here on for a little bit.
Okay.
He was initially saying, well, there's of course the increase in acceptance, and now he's saying, but what about the increase in people being seduced into,
really.
that psychologists are taking any mental health issue and saying, oh, you're trans.
Yeah.
Where he gets that idea, I've got no idea.
That sounds like a J.K. Rowling.
That's absolutely a J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Abigail Shrier thing. Now, I spent a few minutes trying to figure out where.
No. The last comment.
Oh yeah. Some of these people who legitimize denial aren't being paid for it.
Hey, Adam. No, Odin's comment.
Are being paid. Yeah, he's correct. No, he's not correct. Odin, he's not correct.
Explain why he's not correct. Didi.
Okay, he's not correct because any responsible... if you go to a psychologist, if you've got problems other than presenting as trans or presenting with gender issues, then they're not going to say that you're trans. I'm sorry, that doesn't happen.
Oh shit! Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, accidentally turned on the TV.
Yeah.
Go on.
That's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. I mean, I think if any psychologist or psychiatrist started doing that, they would lose their license.
Yeah.
Probably fairly quickly.
Yeah.
I think it would become a scandal. It wouldn't be tolerated. And most people who are gender counselors are very careful to sort of screen people and talk to them to see exactly where this notion of gender is. I've seen it myself. I know what he means. He's correct. It does happen. What have you seen? I mean, I don't know. I've worked with a number of gender counselors. I've seen them. I've seen how they work. I'm not saying there might be some rogue person somewhere. If they are out there, they should be. They should have their license taken away.
Yeah.
Basically, it's unethical and shouldn't happen. And I don't think it generally does. I mean, at least here in Tasmania and in Australia, anywhere that I've seen, I can't speak for everywhere, schools are generally pretty resistant to trans kids transitioning. Some of them are willing to deal with it, but parents have an uphill battle. We've dealt a lot with the parents of trans kids, and the parents of trans kids aren't pushing their kids to be trans.
No.
The parents of trans kids have to be convinced. And the indications for any kind of trans counselor, or before they're willing to accept that a child actually is trans, they have to be insistent, persistent, and consistent. In other words, they have to be speaking out really loudly that they are trans, or they are not the gender that they were assigned, that this has to be consistent over a period of time. They have to keep insisting even when they're pushed back on. And these are the tests before they will allow any child to transition socially.
And let's just put out there that trans people have been around for thousands of years. This isn't some newfangled 21st century nonsense. This is something, trans people have existed in indigenous cultures and all over the world for thousands of years. It's well documented, and even politicians in Tasmania now have a very good idea of how long trans people have existed. And I invite people to check out the trans playlist I have, and there are politicians giving speeches. One in particular, Carrie Fisher, was it?
Carrie Fisher, yeah.
Carrie Fisher?
No, that's an actor.
An actor. Carrie Fisher, is it? Carrie
O'Brien, is it?
No, that's a journalist.
That's the
Oh,
presenter.
anyway. Have a look at the trans playlist,
yeah.
and you'll see there's two or three politicians that give excellent speeches, and this one of them in particular.
There are a number of members of the Legislative Council that have been doing a lot of stuff, and they had a lot of presentations from transphobes, from the Catholic Church, and so on. I have an old but passing interest in sexuality. I looked into genes, chromosomes, social psychology. I'm looking at the big picture. Well, we're not even talking about genes and chromosomes, and I'm not going to talk about that here. I may do something about sexual differentiation from a biological standpoint someplace later. It's really not about that.
No.
Trans people are trans regardless of their genes and chromosomes.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, Glenn is here repeating TERF talking points. He's, and these are the kind of things that have resulted in real harm to young trans people in not being able to get hormone blockers and that kind of stuff, and being forced, therefore, to transition into what may be the wrong gender and cause them what is really irrevocable damage.
Yeah.
Now, there have been various studies. Of course, there are people who have detransitioned. There have been studies about that have shown, and this is good scientific studies, that have shown that I think it's something like less than 1% of people who are trans detransitioned. I mean, anybody can make mistakes. Anybody can lie to psychologists, and this has happened for a long period of time. If you really want to get hormones or something, it's possible to lie. Now, most of the people who've detransitioned may have gone on hormones. Virtually none of them have had surgery. And a study has been done that shows something like 83% of the people who detransitioned because of the lack of social support and because of social opposition. Most of them lived in rural areas and just got a lot of shit, couldn't deal with it. And so they detransitioned, but they didn't think that they weren't trans.
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting person on YouTube who talks about detransitioning and the fact that they detransitioned because they thought it would solve a number of their problems. And they found that it didn't solve those problems. And this is something trans people have said to people for a very long time. I know I've heard that stuff from trans people from the 80s talking to people who think that they're trans, that, you know, if you think this is going to solve your problems, the only problem that it might solve is if you are trans and you have a problem with your gender identity.
Yeah.
That's the only problem it may solve. And
Yeah.
it may present a number of other problems.
Yeah.
Because there's a hell of a lot of discrimination out there. You may end up losing work. You may be able to not get work. You may have problems with education and a whole housing and a whole range of things.
Yeah.
You may be faced with violence. I mean, I can think of a young trans girl who was assaulted in the mall in Hobart.
Yeah.
By, there was this street preacher, who started harassing her, and then somebody from the street just came up and punched her. Yeah. And this is a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
So being trans is not woohoo, yahoo, it's really fun. Not particularly, and most trans people
You know what's fascinating,
know that
Didi?
from a very,
How many cisgendered people have suddenly become experts on this issue?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you get, and they like, J.K. Rowling. You know what I mean? Like, she's got this big megaphone sort of thing, and suddenly there's this, like, suddenly everybody's got an opinion on it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, aren't there, like,
Yeah.
you'd think that there were hundreds of millions of trans people on the planet. There really isn't.
Yeah.
There's probably a couple of million.
Yeah. Jara says she's very accepting of however people want to identify. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, can some people make mistakes about being transgender? Yeah, a few people have done that. Have people made mistakes about getting married? Absolutely. You see
Yeah.
divorce all the time. You see
Yeah.
domestic violence all the time. You see all kinds of problems with marriage. Do people say, well, this is a good reason to not have
And
marriage?
a lot of trans people don't do a whole transitioning thing of surgery
Well, particularly,
and all that kind of stuff.
with non-binary people.
Yeah, yeah.
Non-binary people may choose not to use hormones at all.
I look forward to a day
Yeah.
when this just isn't an issue, where people are just able to be
And-
as they are.
Yeah. Glenn Greenwald ended up doing some really anti-NB things, non-binary people things near the end of this. Shall we do a little
Did
bit
he?
more of him?
Yeah, let's do a bit more of this,
and work our way through this.
The culture around you as well, peer pressure is enormous. We all know that who have been teenagers or young adults. And so if you see lots of people claiming bi and trans status, or even gay and lesbian status, you may think, well, I probably am that too, or I want to be that too. We have seen lots of cases where white people have gotten caught claiming falsely to be people of color, especially in academic.
Okay, here we go. He's saying,
Oh, and
This
just
is- this-
before you go on, this we must this whole thing about that. It sounds like Odin's putting forward some yeah. Anyway, we'll get back to that. His comment. Okay, sorry. Continue, Dee Dee.
okay, well, sure, it's possible that
Dee Dee,
people...
you have to read out
Okay.
the comment before and say who it is. Before
Okay,
you
Odin says, it's not uncommon for youth to go through a period of sexual questioning. It may take many forms or considerations and experiences, including abuse, if
it is multifaceted.
it is multifaceted. Well, it may be abuse, but I mean, people who are sexually investigating their own sexuality,
What?
sexual
Sorry.
questioning, obviously, like, I think it's not uncommon for a lot of people to, particularly these days, to question, where do I stand sexually, in terms of my sexuality, in terms of my sexual orientation. And the fact that it's okay to do that, a lot of people see that it's okay to do that. I don't think that necessarily has bad consequences. I think tying it to abuse is really wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
are you saying people shouldn't question? Are
Yeah.
you saying people must be rigid?
I'm not
I
sure
mean,
what this
people's
means.
questioning of their sexuality. I mean, it's great if people want to experiment with their sexuality. That's fine. I think that's a really healthy thing for people to do. I think if they end up deciding that they're straight or mostly straight, that's fine too. I think, to say, I'm not going to question it. I'm straight. Nobody can make me think differently. Well, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. And what's
Uh,
this? Hang on. What is this? I'm not sure. Odin says, I'm not sure I'm happy with self-declaring identity or gender. There at the moment a 35-year-old who identify as an 8-year-old girl. What?
Okay, look. I think identity, like there's
What?
garbage.
Hold on. Am I understanding that? A
Yeah.
35-year-old
I think
identifies
this is a nonsense.
Yeah.
This is a nonsense. People, I'm not saying there might not be somebody somewhere who identifies as an attack helicopter. That's fine. We've all heard that rubbish somewhere or other on the internet, but that's not what trans people are doing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's not what trans people are
when you
doing.
go pulling out
The question of
hold on.
identity...
When you go pulling out examples like that, Odin, of a 35-year-old,
you lose credibility really fast.
Yeah, you're actually showing something about yourself that you're pulling out such extreme examples in relation to this. Anyway, let's just go on with this. What was he just saying before?
Okay, what he was saying was he was doing the thing of the hierarchy is of victimhood, and that people may want to claim greater oppression for points. That people may be claiming to be trans for victim points or oppression points. And this will get... I don't know what circles he runs in.
Yeah.
But I don't, I can't think
That
of
is the
any
most
social
ridiculous-
environment.
That guy he pulled out as that picture, which he'll talk about later,
Yeah.
that just seems to me such a rare and odd thing to pull out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep, go on.
But right now, this is something he repeats a few times in this thing of oppression points. And I don't know what circles he belongs to, but in most of the circles, I think in probably all the circles I travel in, I don't know that there are such a thing as oppression points.
Yeah.
Nobody gets, more, kowtowing to because they have more oppression. Now, I understand there might be some little circles where that happens. Certainly, within some limited social circles, all kinds of criterion can be seen as, social points to give you more social credibility. In certain circles, going to prison might give you more credibility. There's actually a study, a kind of psychology called, what's it called?
What do you...
I've forgotten. Something symbolism. But it's Irving Goffman basically developed this thing that looks at society and looks at different subcultures, and within certain subcultures there might be certain things that give you cred.
Yeah.
Like having tattoos might give you cred in certain circles. Being able to be whipped, with a single tail might give you cred in some other circle. Being, a white nationalist might give you cred in a different circle, or a Christian or whatever. Certainly there might be some circle where being more oppressed will give you cred, but that's not why people are trans. At least most people, I would say, and in most circles, it's not going to get you anything.
No.
Being trans is going to get you beaten up in the street. It's going to get you harassed, in a bus.
Good luck.
It's going to get you...
Good luck that guy getting, special consideration because he's non-binary.
Yeah.
I mean, and seeing himself and appealing to as an oppressed class.
Yeah. He talks about that. We'll have to show that picture later.
We haven't got to that yet, but I mean,
But there's, this whole notion of oppression privilege.
Yeah.
Well, like, oh, I'm black, I have the most oppression. Well, actually, you just have the most oppression. The truth of it is, you're more likely to be shot by a cop. You're more likely to have trouble getting work. You're more likely to have trouble getting housing. You're more likely to have trouble in a number of ways, except maybe in certain circles. In black circles, you may be...
And black trans women are very likely to be
black trans women are more likely to be killed than anybody.
Anyway.
Anyway, let's go on. But this particular argument of his comes up several times.
Yeah.
Just institutions where there is a benefit accorded to someone who can claim that status. We all know, this is the thing you're not supposed to admit, we all know that in certain societal sectors like academia, like journalism, like online culture for young people, being able to say I'm not a straight white male or a straight white female, I'm actually bi and I have a rainbow flag in my avatar, or I'm trans or non-binary, confers benefit.
This is white tears.
It means that in
the oppression of white people.
Arguments, people will say that that person has to be deferred to because they're oppressed or discriminated against in a way that others aren't. That it's a form of privilege to attack. It's a shield. It's a fantastic instrument in a lot of cases. So when you combine this growing acceptance, which can turn into encouragement on the part of mental health professionals and parents and school administrators in certain sectors in the United States, combined with the peer pressure that comes from it being glorified online or in schools or among friend sets, or people who otherwise get misdiagnosed. A lot of people will be told and be led to believe that they're trans. Very well-intentioned people. No one's doing this with malice. And they get influenced to reach a conclusion that isn't actually true, and then they say that. They say, I reached the conclusion that I'm trans, even though I actually wasn't. Now, I know for a fact that that has happened because I've heard people describe their own experience. What I don't know is how significant is that? Is it really that growing societal acceptance is the overwhelming factor in explaining?
Okay, I just want to break again here. I've got it on.
Yeah.
I want to break here. He's talking about, like one thing, this notion of, do you get to regulate, misdiagnosis? Well, increasingly there's a move towards people just being able to get hormones as long as they understand the consequences. That people have the right to make choices. That society doesn't need to regulate your gender. That it's not going to hurt anybody, except possibly if you make a mistake, well, that's on you. People can hang glide. They might make a mistake and crash. They can jump out of airplanes. They can do all kinds of things. People can, get drunk and drive cars. People can do all kinds of things. People can get piercings, tattoos. Why should society?
I have a little bit of trouble hearing that, because I'm hearing it from a distance.
Oh, yeah.
So what is he?
He was saying, that people are misdiagnosed, that we can't let that happen, that somebody might not really be trans and might get hormone,
I see. Yes. Sorry, I
okay.
had my microphone
aside
turned
from the fact that, in fact, it's generally still pretty bloody difficult
Yeah.
to get hormones.
Yeah.
You have to convince a doctor to prescribe you hormones, and doctors are conservative.
Yeah.
Doctors also have to think about whether or not they might get sued
Yeah.
if they make a mistake. So doctors will generally want to make sure that the person is not only understands what they're doing, but is stable
Yeah.
and is not going to change their mind. Even that, a lot of trans people feel, makes it difficult for them to get things that they want. And it really raises the question of, well, if people can go get a nose job, they can get a facelift, they can make their face look like a cat, they can do, they can have horns put in their head and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Why do all these people, feel they have a right to say, I'm going to protect you from making this decision?
Yeah. Heteronormative patriarchy.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just go on a little bit.
This amazing explosion in the number of people self-identifying as LGBT, and particularly B and T? Or are those other influences as significant, or are there other influences as well that we haven't yet identified? Why would anyone think that it's improper or immoral or bigoted to want to know the answers to those questions? These are incredibly new phenomena. These are radical change. Of course I'm interested. I'm interested as a journalist. I'm interested as a person with a working set of rational faculties. And I'm interested as a member of the society, and I'm interested as someone who is gay and has been part of the LGBT community my entire life, and where that identity has shaped so much of what I'm experiencing. It's affecting that community, it's affecting the broader society, and it's affecting humanity. Of course I'm interested in knowing the answer, and that's what I asked. I said, it seems like there are other factors we
Can I say something before you say something?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, if he's so interested, why hasn't he interviewed at least one person that's trans and that is an expert at discussing this sort of thing? This is such bullshit. I'm sorry, but when people, when he says something like that, of course I'm interested. Well, if you're interested, interview the effing person who is trans, an effing person who is trans and has a clue, instead of tapping into J.K. Rowling-esque people or TERFs or whatever. I mean, this is sort of drives me spare that this happens again and again with the people with the biggest mouths about this issue never ever interview or talk to and find out about this issue from a trans person. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I was going to say that. If he's that interested, why hasn't he done any research?
Yeah, exactly.
To actually find out anything about.
Exactly.
And that would include talking to trans people.
Exactly.
It would be talking to gender counselors. It would be talking to, not just listening to TERFs.
Yeah.
The other thing is his presentation here of, I'm just interested. I'm just a curious person. I'm just raising these issues. He's completely ignoring the fact that this is a highly politicized issue.
Yeah, exactly.
That this is an issue where the Murdoch press here in Australia has article after article, day after day, that's anti-trans.
Yeah.
They use the free speech thing all the time.
Yeah.
But it's just pure transphobic garbage, most of it.
Yeah.
And of course, there's no recourse because Murdoch owns nearly all the freaking media in Australia.
Yeah.
And you have people like J.K. Rowling and Abigail Shrier, and they manage to get on all these shows and spread all their stuff, and nobody checks any of their facts.
Yeah.
Nobody asks whether what they're saying has any basis.
Yeah.
And so on. And the consequences of this is we're seeing more transphobic laws. We see Tulsi Gabbard trying to jump in there and
introduce.
I'll put a pin in that one too. Tulsi Gabbard did that in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
The important issue she had was to try and pass a law to say that if any school recognizes trans children and allows them still to participate in sports, and this is elementary schools and high schools, if they get any federal money at all, and virtually all public schools do, that they would have their money cut out.
Yeah.
So she's basically saying we must persecute trans children or you will be defunded.
Yeah.
To all schools for all children. And you see
hold
that
on a
kind of
second,
thing.
hold on a
You
second.
see the stuff in the UK.
Yeah.
You see, state after state passing this weird stuff, transphobic stuff.
Yeah.
It's highly politicized. One side has a massive platform.
Yeah.
If they have any objections at all on Twitter or some other place where people are allowed to speak, then it's cancel, free speech, and all this, crying that they're being abused.
Yeah. Odin, are you saying that trans people don't know, wouldn't know what they're talking about? Is that what you're saying? What do you consider an expert? A cisgendered person talking about trans people and their experience, or a trans person talking about their experience? What does no mean? No to what?
No is informed. You would need psychologists, biologists, geneticists, and a translator, and someone to keep or make sense of the din. Well, first off, trans doesn't have anything to do with biology or genetics. It doesn't have anything to do with it at all. Trans is about a social role. It is how people are treated in society. It's about equality and equal rights, and it's about the right to self-determination. That's what these things are about. Trans people, being trans isn't about your biology. It's not. Yeah. And anybody who says it is just doesn't understand. Either that, or they're trying to make an argument that trans people shouldn't be allowed to be trans, which is the kind of argument J.K. Rowling makes.
Okay.
So
Odin,
I'm not really willing to carry on with that sort of stuff.
I think you. I can see where you're coming from, and I don't think you're actually really listening to what's being said. And this isn't a debate. Really, this is more about what Glenn Greenwald is saying, and I actually don't think anything that's said by either Dee Dee or I is going to convince you. So we're just going to keep on with what Glenn Greenwald is saying, and just you can.
Yeah, the people. If you're going to investigate this, you talk to people like gender counselors, like Elizabeth Riley, people who've been doing it, who's got a PhD and is a psychologist who's been studying this stuff and working with trans people for the last 20 years. You'd be talking about trans people, because trans people understand what it is to be trans better than almost anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Dee Dee has a bit of a clue. She's written legislation for Tasmanian Parliament on this issue.
I've done counselling in the Gender Centre.
She's done counselling in the Gender Centre. She has a lot of experience with this area, and so
I have a master's degree in sexual health.
I really don't know
but
how.
That's not. Yeah. It's more that I understand this.
Yes.
Like I've been involved in the queer community most of my life.
Yeah.
I came out as bi in 1965.
Yeah.
And I've been involved in the queer community since then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've known trans people. I've lived in the Tenderloin in the 60s. Anyway.
Having an opinion is fine, but it seems like you're not really.
Yeah, I'm not really willing to carry on with that.
Yeah.
I'd rather do an analysis of what.
Yeah. Let's just do that. Yeah.
Should know how significant those factors are. So that was my first point. My second point was this.
What I wanted to say about this, aside from what you said about them just not investigating anything, is that I just wanted to re-emphasize that these sort of questions, it's kind of like saying, well, shouldn't we investigate whether black people are less intelligent than white people? It's just an academic discussion. It's not racism, except it is, in the context of our society. Yeah, it is. That particular question, who's asking it? Why are you asking it? Why are you asking these questions? Why are you focusing on this? Given all of the problems in the world, why are you focusing on trans people? Glenn Greenwald. Why?
Well, that's what I was saying. It's like this has come out of left field. This is not really his thing.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it keeps escalating, and I bet you it won't end here. It won't end here. He'll come out with some other clanger.
Yeah.
And he still won't interview a trans
Yeah.
person. He still won't interview a trans person. He's
No.
been going on now about this. He's pushed up that awful Shreya book.
Chris Hedges, at least after his having a couple of turfs on at least had Pauline Parks on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Judges made an unfortunate, what I thought an unfortunate error. I could hardly believe it. And he interviewed a major turf on
Couple
his,
two. Yeah.
two turfs.
Yeah.
And then straight after that, he interviewed a trans woman, Pauline Parks. Thank goodness, because it was a horror story.
I think it was a few weeks after that, but
Yeah, it was
yeah.
a horror story. What he did with interviewing those first two
Yeah.
women, it was dreadful.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. And then he interviewed Pauline Parks and kind of made up for it.
Anyway,
let's
let's go on with him.
I find this extremely fascinating as well too, but this also created a lot of animosity. I think this is where the
Did he?
Yeah.
Adam said, I bet Glenn will end up interviewing someone like Blair White. Yeah. Good one. Good one.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably,
Yes.
yes. Let's find some
Yeah,
right-wing trans person to
Yeah.
interview.
Yep. Good one.
accusations of biphobia and biphobic came from. They asked the people who identify as bisexual, this big increase in people who identify as bisexual, are you currently in a long-term
turn your thing
marriage
off?
or a long-term relationship, a marriage or a long-term relationship? And of the people who self-identified as bi, who said yes, they asked them, are you in a relationship with somebody of the opposite sex or somebody of the same sex? Overwhelmingly of the cluster, this huge cluster now of people saying that they're bi, overwhelmingly the people who are in a long-term relationship or a marriage are in one with somebody of the opposite sex, not someone of the same sex. So they're living in a heterosexual appearing relationship, a relationship that appears heterosexual to the outside world, not one like my marriage to a man that is quite obviously gay, and therefore obviously the experience is very, very different. How the society reacts is very, very different.
Oh, did he? I'm having trouble hearing that, so you might have to explain to me what he just said.
He's
Sorry,
saying,
I'm hearing from Dee Dee's computer over there, and I can't hear it very well. Go on.
He's referring to this chart here. He's saying that one of the things the Gallup poll did was look at bisexual people.
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, they were married to people of the or had relationships with people of the opposite sex instead of people of the same sex.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Gallup poll actually had two little things. They had U.S. adults and LGBT adults, marital status, married to the opposite sex, 47%, or living with a domestic opposite sex partner, 8.1%. That's for all adults.
Mm.
And of course, same-sex partners is a very small percentage. But when you go down to bisexuals, married to the opposite sex partner, bisexual people are married. It's only 17.2% are married to an opposite sex spouse. Only 1% is married to a same-sex spouse. Living with the opposite domestic partner, 13.3. Living with a same-sex domestic partner, 2.7. Single or never married, 55.5%. So the majority of bi people are single or divorced or widowed. Of the people who are living with somebody, a lot more are with opposite sex partners. But why is that a surprise?
Mm.
I mean, he then says, it's not like people like me who's living with my same-sex partner. Well, bi people are not like gay people. Bi people are bi. Bi people are not the same thing. It is a separate class.
Mm.
You can't compare them. Like, yes, for gay people or lesbians, there's all kinds of issues about living with a same-sex partner. Yeah, a lot less now than there used to be. But, there's still some issues around the place. We can get married now. Yeah, it's a whole lot better. But if somebody is bi, why should that mean that they are equally living with same-sex partners?
Mm.
And then I think of people like I have a couple of friends who are bi. I'm thinking of Kat and Glenn.
Yeah.
And she's married to an opposite sex partner, but she has at least 2 partners I know who are consistent partners that she's had for at least 5 years who are same-sex partners. And she's not married to them, but they're there.
Yeah.
And it neglects a lot of variation, a lot of diversity.
Mm.
Yeah, there's actually a huge amount of diversity within bisexual people.
Mm.
And yeah, I think still it's much easier for bi people to be married or living with somebody of the opposite sex. I think socially that's still in play. Wouldn't you say so, Trish?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they don't have same-sex partners or even stable same-sex partners. I mean, one of the things I see as very positive in that is that there's a lot more people who are coming out as bisexual instead of the situation as somebody who's done a lot of sexual health work. There's a classification: men who have sex with men. And those are people who identify as heterosexual.
Yeah.
They will say on all of the forms that they, have to sign ever, or if they're talking to people, they will say that they're straight, but they have sex with men. They won't say that. They just do that.
Yeah.
And that's actually a reasonably big category. And it's fairly interesting that with young people, a lot more of them are identifying as bi.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's be honest.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be living with a same-sex partner, although that might happen.
Yeah.
We know bi people. We have one bi friend who's recently gotten divorced and left their opposite sex partner and is living with a same-sex partner. I mean, yeah, okay, it happens.
Just to give you these numbers,
Did you turn your mic off?
of bisexual adults who say they're in a marriage or long-term relationship, 17% are married to someone, to an opposite sex spouse, and 13% are living with an opposite sex partner. Compared to the number of people who say they're bisexual who are living with or married to someone of the same sex, 1% of bisexuals say they're married to someone of the same sex, compared to 17% who are married to someone of the opposite sex. 17 times more bisexuals are married to someone of the opposite sex than the same sex. And the people living in a long-term domestic partnership, only 2.7% as compared to 13% are in one with a same-sex partner. Why do I think that's so significant? Because obviously, the experience of being bisexual and living with an opposite sex spouse or partner is completely different from my experience as a gay man or a lesbian's experience being married to a woman. Completely different. How the society looks at your family, how they react to the person that you've chosen to be with. It's almost hard to find any similarities. And
Okay, did you hear that?
Yeah. Did you turn your mic on?
I did.
Yeah.
He's basically making the argument that I think basically that bi people shouldn't be counted as queer. They're not like me. I'm living with my gay boyfriend, and it's completely different than somebody who's bi. Yeah, it is different. Bi people are not gay people. Yeah, and bi people face different challenges than gay people. And at this point, bi people probably face a lot of flack from queer people, from gay and lesbian people. They face a lot of flack from particularly lesbians.
Yeah,
That's been a long-standing
I'm not
thing.
sure if that's the same with young people now.
I'm not so sure
I
it's
know.
the
What do
same
you
as young
reckon,
people.
Adam?
I think there's
Adam's
probably
there somewhere.
a more openness.
What do you reckon, Adam? Adam's he's what? He's a lot younger than us.
Yeah. Yes, we're old. We're boomers. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
In fact, not only that, but bisexual can span the entire range from somebody who is genuinely attracted 50-50, perfectly down the line to men and women sexually, pure bisexual, somebody is equally attracted and has no real preference, to somebody who has once or twice or a few times kind of experimented, maybe back in college or a little bit after, with bisexuality. They made out with their roommate, or they were inebriated and had sex with someone of the same sex a few times. And it's a perfectly reasonable way to identify if they want as bisexual. But that spectrum is very wide. It's very wide. And we should interrogate whether this big increase in population of people identifying as bisexual are people who are genuinely bisexual, or whether they're saying that they are because of these very limited experiences that don't really shape what their lives are like or how the society responds to them or the legal rights that they have. And again, ask, why is this increase in bisexuality so substantial?
Oh, yeah.
People are calling themselves bi. They're not genuinely bi. They don't live with the same oppression that I live with, but they're doing it for oppression points. They can say, they can claim they can put their rainbow flag on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Adam says, Glenn is basically saying, I'm not one of those gay people. I'm doing it right. I'm valid.
Yeah.
I think he's saying that bi people are not really like gay people. They shouldn't be given the same credit. And
Yeah.
that some of them are just doing it for oppression points.
Yeah, really.
They're not even really bi.
Who is he talking about? I don't know who he mixes with, but anyway.
And it's just sad.
Yeah.
It's like, God, if we can get that, we're that much older than him.
Yeah.
Another couple of generations.
Yeah.
If we can get that, why the hell can't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, really.
and people are more open. I think you're quite right. I think people.
Oh,
these
someone's
days
muted.
don't have so
Didi,
much issue.
are you muted?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm muted.
Have
Sorry,
you turned yourself?
Jera.
Have you turned
I
your
was-
mic on?
I have now.
Okay.
I was
say,
just saying.
say it again.
I was just saying that Glenn is basically saying that these bi people, they're not really like me, like gay and lesbian people, and some of them aren't even really probably bi. They're just doing it for oppression points.
Yeah.
And this is, God, if we can get it, why can't
Yeah,
he get
yeah,
it? We're older
yeah.
than him.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're quite right. Your comment that younger people don't have the same issue with bi
No,
people. They're
no.
much more accepting. I'm talking
Yeah.
about gay and lesbian people are much more accepting of
Yeah.
bi people as being just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not so much of an issue.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly bi people do sleep with people of either gender.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they sleep equally with that,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that they.
And anyway, there's such a
And-
broad
and so
spectrum.
what?
You can identify
I
as lesbian, but still have an attraction to the opposite sex sort of
sex
thing.
occasionally. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, Look
it-
at Pat Khalifa.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I myself, I've had. I mean, in my early 20s, I had 2 or 3 relationships with men.
Yeah.
I just because I predominantly had relationships with women since I was 23, doesn't mean I don't find some men attractive.
Yeah.
And I did have relationships with men before, but this is before I sort of realized that it was okay to have relationships with women. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
That sort of, back in
Before you really,
late
yeah.
70s and the early 80s,
Yeah.
where it wasn't that far away from the time where it was seen as a disorder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had parents who thought I should go and see a psychiatrist and a priest when I came out to them. Anyway, but yeah, I mean that there's a broad spectrum.
There's a broad spectrum, and that's
for
fine.
everybody.
I mean, the really sad thing is, what are gay and lesbian people going for? Not for being a special class.
Yeah.
They're going for, we should all be able to love whoever we love.
Yeah.
Whoever we love.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's
Yeah.
stop all this.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's kind of, but they're not like me. I'm really gay. I'm really gay. I have a husband.
Yeah.
It's different for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different for everybody.
I've dropped the label of lesbian. I dropped that a while ago because I get really tired of these fucking categories and
Yeah.
boxes and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It gets really fucking tiresome, and I'm so over it. I'm so over the fixation on the categories. I know that there has to be a point in time, Dee Dee, where categories are
Yeah.
important to actually help people be recognized. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And groups
Yeah.
be recognized. But I look forward to the day when this is not an issue. This
Yeah.
whole thing is not an issue at all, and that everybody just accepts people how they are, and whoever they're attracted to, at whatever point in life they are attracted to them,
Yeah.
or they're not, or however they feel about themselves, however they want to present. I
Yeah.
don't give a shit how people present. I think it's great. I feel like in some ways, even though people say things have progressed, and in some ways they have, but I actually felt like people were a lot more, like when I was in England in the early 80s, and there was all that whole punk thing, I felt like people actually expressed a whole lot more themselves at that time than they do now. The conformity of appearance, I find, maybe this is just because of where we live and stuff, but the conformity of appearance, I find, is really, really strange. It's almost like it's gone backwards. But anyway, that's just my feelings about it.
Anyway,
Anyhow,
I just found it sad that he's sort of holding up, being a gay man as, this is this, like, and these people don't have that. And it's like, no, they're people who believe in loving whoever they love.
Yeah. I think
that was the freaking point.
I don't think he's doing this.
Gay people wanted the right to love and marry and
Kim.
be with whoever they wanted.
Yeah. Hey, Diddy?
That everybody should have that right.
At this point, I don't think he's doing this in bad faith.
I don't think it's being
but I think he's really sort of, I'm talking about the whole thing. I'm not sure at this point whether he's doing this in bad faith. I don't think so. But if he keeps going this way, I will really start to question it in a big way.
Yeah.
Because I do like him. I do like Glenn Greenwald, but I feel like he's gotten on, it's like one of his wheels has come right off the track, and he doesn't seem to know how to get back on it, and he's not talking to the right people.
Hi, Kim.
I don't know what's going on with him, but I really wish that he would talk to a trans person, a reliable trans person who is able to articulate things.
He's an investigative journalist.
I know.
He should be talking to several
Of course he
trans
should.
people,
Of course he should.
not just get opinion from one.
Of course he should.
He should be talking
Of course,
to.
I mean that
Yeah.
too. You know,
Yeah,
he should
yeah.
be talking. You would think, actually, as a journalist, he would have done all of that research first
Yeah.
before he opened his yap.
Yeah.
But no, he's opened his yap first after talking to some TERFs,
And-
which is just
and then-
amazing
and then
to me.
I'm just asking those questions.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
I'm
There's
just-
actually a trans woman who said, he keeps saying this, I just want the discussion. This discussion is worth having.
Yeah.
The conversation
Yeah, but I'm not
needs
going to
be
talk to
had.
any trans people.
And she's said several times, have a conversation with me then.
Yes.
And he won't.
No.
So he's not really willing
No.
to have a conversation
And this is something
with
that
trans
happens
people.
over and over and over again, and you
So-
can tell a lot about the person
Yeah.
by the fact that they're really resistant to having a conversation with a trans
I don't know
person.
that it's bad faith, but I would say his views are extremely
Excuse me.
unresearched.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
and include some very strong unconscious bias.
yeah, and if he
at
keeps
least.
going on Joe Rogan and joining in the chorus there in some way,
Well, then
you
he's
really,
part of the problem.
Then you really have to question him. And I don't care that he's gay.
The question
I don't
of-
care
the
that he's
question
gay. He
of-
seems to think that somehow because he's gay, he couldn't possibly be a transphobe. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Some gay people, some gay men I've known are the biggest misogynists and transphobes I know of.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I can think of one or two. You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, I don't think he is doing that in bad faith.
No, But if he keeps going on it,
But I think he has some extreme bias,
yeah.
and the lack of willingness to have a conversation with trans people
Yeah.
borders on bad faith.
Yeah, it does.
And if he keeps using his platform in this way
Yeah.
and going on Joe Rogan and
Yeah.
that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
then regardless of his motives, he's part of the problem.
Yeah, and I would almost say he's grifting to the right. Anyway, let's
keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Angela, again, is it because of
It's a good
acceptance,
thing
or
to-
is it because if you're a straight white guy working in liberal left spaces and need a way to say, oh, I'm not really a straight white guy, I'm privileged, I'm going to throw a little rainbow flag in my avatar and put the word bi in there, and now suddenly you're part of an oppressed class, whether
This
that's
is
part of
his,
it as well. I want to know
oppression
that.
stuff again.
I don't know the answer. I don't pretend to know the answer, but I do want to know that. That's not
This is his
biphobic.
oppression stuff again.
I'm completely
He does
in
it again
favor
and again.
if a bisexual is married to somebody of the same sex, giving them the full legal rights and treating them with the utmost respect, regardless of where they fall on that bisexual spectrum. How is that biphobic to ask, again, what explains this massive increase? But that is what the basis of that allegation was, that I'm biphobic because I asked that question and observed that statistical data. Now here's the last problem I created for myself. One of the interesting data points is that although it wasn't true for baby boomers or Gen X, it is now true that for both millennials and Gen Z, that there are more people identifying as transgender than lesbian. More people identifying as transgender than lesbian. Why is it interesting to me? Because I know a lot of lesbians from being a gay man my entire life. And there are a lot of lesbians in journalism and in literature and in activism who have spoken on this issue because they feel like, especially for lesbians, the issue of growing trans population is having an effect on their culture and their community, and so they're speaking out about it. And one of those writers, one of those journalists is Katie Herzog, who wrote an article just about, I guess, 2 months ago, saying that to her, and she gathered data and she interviewed scholars and talked about her impressions being a gay woman her whole life in many different places around the country, that lesbian culture is kind of dying. Lesbian bars are closing, there are much fewer lesbian spaces.
Jeez
And she
Louise.
posited that one reason for that, there's a lot of factors she identified, that because there's more acceptance, gay men and lesbians don't need to go to gay-only spaces. You can go to straight clubs or mixed clubs and lots of other reasons as well. But one of the factors she posited, hypothesized, asked was whether there are a large number of girls who 20 years ago would have been looked at, or 30 years ago, as masculine girls, and who probably would have eventually become lesbians, or even, masculine lesbians who take on that identity within the lesbian community, who now instead are being told, or who are concluding, that they're not masculine lesbians, but because they're masculine girls, they must be men. They're transgendered men. And then they go and they transition. And therefore, a lot of people who 30 years ago or 20 years ago were lesbians are now instead trans men. Now, in a lot of ways, that's probably a good thing. I'm sure there are a lot of lesbians who 30 years ago were actually trans men, but who didn't feel safe or comfortable identifying as such because the society wasn't sufficiently accepting of it. And now, a lot of them are being able to self-actualize, live their identity, and that is genuinely fantastic. I couldn't be more thrilled. I nonetheless want to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this is obviously tying into the whole transphobic stuff.
Yeah.
But there are elements of truth in this, and things that I've seen and experienced. Certainly, gay bars with lesbian bars in the late 60s and early 70s had a lot of very butch women, and a lot of women doing butch femme. And you get people like Leslie Feinberg, who wrote Stone Butch Blues, who actually ended up working jobs as a man, but was in lesbian culture and all of that. And there's certainly the issue that as time has changed, as time has progressed, people's options change. In the 60s, really there was an option for some people who were assigned male at birth to be transsexuals. And the model for transsexuals was Christine Jorgensen, who was the GI into a blonde bombshell. And it was highly medically regulated, very strongly gatekeepers who basically wouldn't give anybody permission to get any kind of medical assistance unless they were doing the full-on ultra femme thing.
Yeah.
And that was a real thing. And at that point, there basically wasn't any surgery for women. And so there were virtually no trans men. Very, very few people. On the other hand, within lesbian circles, there were Diesel Dykes, there were butch femme people. There were, I know by the 80s, there were people who identified as as boys, B-O-I.
Yeah.
And there was daddy boy. There were people who were identified as tranny boys, meaning they were BOI lesbians who were taking testosterone. And none of those people classified themselves as transgender at that point.
Yeah.
And then there were a few trans men who were mainly going with hormones and top surgery, and that's still the case for most trans men because bottom surgery is so bloody expensive, and there are some real difficulties. The surgery isn't that fabulous for them. The surgical options.
Yeah.
And it's a question of your options. If you are somebody identifying somewhere on the masculine range, or kind of not on the feminine range,
and do you choose to go ahead with further, actual surgery?
No, if you're there somewhere, you may have chosen one of those lesbian identities, or those identities within the lesbian community. You know?
Yeah.
I think with the around 2000, non-binary started to be a thing.
Mm.
And a lot of people who didn't feel comfortable doing the whole trans thing felt comfortable with the non-binary thing.
Mm.
But I mean, there's also been, I remember in the 60s, in lesbian bars, and you've told me that story about lesbian bars with the really butch women, like really dressed in a suit and doing all that stuff.
I could tell you a funny story about that.
Yeah,
Should I tell a quick story?
Yeah, tell a quick story.
When I hadn't actually come out in Australia, but I had. No, I came out in England, but when I came back to Australia, I decided to go to a gay bar. It was a gay bar, and this is a bad story about lesbians adopting the worst characteristics of patriarchal kind of behavior.
Male roles.
Male roles. And I was sitting at the bar, and then this woman came up to me and said, if you look over in that direction and you smile at that woman, she'll buy you a drink,
Yeah.
And that made me want to head out real quick.
And that woman was really very
it was awful.
Butch.
Yeah, and
and there's still a lot of butch people. Butch is an identity.
Yeah, but she was had adopted all that bullshit, this male sort of thing bullshit.
Yeah.
If you smile at me, I'll buy you a drink, and also that sort of there was this slight predatory thing in there's some other lesbians I met that had this kind of, that male had adopted the whole male predatory sort of thing, and I felt like a piece of meat. Anyway, that wasn't but that was an unfortunate. They were unfortunate. Their behaviors were unfortunate, but that's not my general experience. I
remember. Yeah, I've seen all that kind of stuff, certainly in the 60s. But I also remember with the rise of feminism, where feminism first rejected lesbians because they thought it would give them a bad reputation.
Yeah.
They were already being called lesbians, and they didn't want that.
Yeah.
So they weren't going to let lesbians in the National Organization of Women and other feminist organizations.
Right. Yeah.
They threw them out, even though they were people who started it. And then with the rise of some of the feminist theorists, they decided that the best thing was to reject all masculinity, and the only proper way to be sexual, that sex with men was rape, and that the only proper way to be sexual, if you were a real feminist, was to be a lesbian.
Andrea Dworkin.
Andrea Dworkin and some of these people.
Yeah.
And when that happened, you got a lot of people who were political lesbians, who, as somebody described it, were lesbians because they didn't like men rather than because they liked women.
Yeah.
Who moved into lesbian spaces and started, really, they said all this butch femme stuff has to stop, and actually kind of ostracized a lot of lesbians who'd been in those spaces for a long time.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of those lesbians being excluded from lesbian spaces. So the idea that lesbian spaces are some sacrosanct, lesbian culture. Well, lesbian culture's changed quite a bit at various times.
Yeah, and we're probably, it's probably very, very different with much younger people and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, we should probably, I think we're getting a bit sidetracked with the...
I just want to say one more little thing.
Yeah.
And that's that when I was first at gay and lesbian bars, they were bars. I mean, it was being queer was still illegal, and it was a place to kind of hide out and connect with people and that kind of stuff. What I've seen as being gay or lesbian has become more accepted, the bar culture has declined, particularly with lesbians. You know, bars like the Leichhardt and stuff have closed down.
Yeah.
Not so much because there aren't lesbians. Lesbians still go out to clubs and have all kinds of things. There's dozens of lesbian groups in Hobart.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
But they're social groups.
Yeah.
You know, rather than having a bar.
Yeah. Sure. There's just different
And the
ways that
nature
people.
of lesbian culture changes
Yeah.
with time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I wanted
Yeah,
to say.
yeah.
That
There's
yeah.
different ways
And
over
it had
time.
nothing to do with trans people.
Yeah, there's different ways over time that socializing takes place in different ways
Yeah.
over time through generations
Depending on
and
your
stuff
options,
like that.
depending on the culture, depending on the acceptability.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, where you can have a lesbian group like Lemons After 5, I think is one of the groups in Hobart. You know, it's
yeah.
gay lesbian women who get together and go around to different pubs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you can go to any pub.
Uh,
You don't have to go to a lesbian pub. You can go to any pub and be a lesbian.
yes.
And that
Yes.
makes a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they prefer to do that, go to restaurants and pubs and
Yeah.
and events and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so do a lot of lesbians, and so do a lot of gay men, and so do a lot of other people in the society who are not LGBT but just interested in human behavior and how the society is organizing itself. Whether it's almost like a reversion in the progress that feminism has made to say that what it means to be a woman is not being extremely thin and feminine with lipstick and high heels and makeup and long hair, but you can actually be a masculine girl. You can crop your hair, you can be a tomboy, you can wear jeans and sneakers. There's no one way of being a woman. Whether girls who fall outside that traditional concept of being a girl that feminism works so hard and the lesbian movement works so hard to fight against, saying, no, we're women, even though we don't comport to that stereotype, are now being told that no, if you fall outside of that stereotype, you're probably a trans boy. I don't know the answer to that question, but I want to. And you can find a lot of lesbians online who started the transition process and then stopped, who say that they feel as though they were encouraged. Again, not as a plot or a conspiracy or by ill-intentioned people, by well-intentioned people, believing that they want to do right by their children or their students or their patients, to find what is ailing them, but they're misdiagnosing them or they're over-diagnosing gender dysphoria with people who don't have it. Of course we should want to know that. Of course we want to know whether the medical field is misdiagnosing or overdiagnosing gender dysphoria and telling people who aren't trans that they are, or encouraging them to think that they are when they're not. Now, the thing people seized on in what I said was that I summarized Katie's article, which I linked to, by saying that there was a disappearance of lesbians. And people said I obviously lied about or misread the data, because as I showed you, the data shows that actually the people identifying as lesbian increased from Gen X to Gen Z from 0.7 to 1.4. And yes, that is true. But it's also true that the increase in lesbianism was far less than the increase of trans and bi people, and we should want to know why. And it's still true that there is a disappearance of lesbian culture for the reasons that Katie identified, which obviously was what I meant when I was referring to her article, but giving shorthand summaries of it on Twitter. That is due to the fact that there are so many girls who would have been lesbians 20 years ago who are now instead trans men.
Okay.
Have you got your thing on?
I've just turned it on.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that's true. I mean, there's a lot of people who would probably have been straight or identifying or calling themselves in a survey straight, who call themselves bi now. There are probably a lot of people who would have just gone along and said that they were women, who are now calling themselves non-binary.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they would have ever called themselves lesbians.
No.
Because I think to call yourself a lesbian you generally have to be very strongly oriented to women. Most of your relationships are women.
Yeah.
Most of your sexual partners are women. At
Yeah.
least most,
Yeah.
if not all.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and when you're talking about gender, I mean, gender doesn't have anything to do with sexuality. You know, who's to say those bi women, or those trans women would have been lesbians?
Yeah.
You know, how many trans men do you know who identify as gay trans men,
Yeah.
meaning they're like men
Yeah.
as sexual partners?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they would never have been lesbians.
Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly non-binary people, I have to say, the increase in non-binary people and the increase in bisexual people, I don't know that those groups don't overlap quite strongly,
Yeah.
because an awful lot of the people that I know who are non-binary are also bisexual or pansexual.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I think, he's basically arguing the same thing. It's basically the lesbian erasure thing. He's
Yeah.
doubling down on that. And
Yeah. This is
oh,
also,
in spite of the fact that there's more people identifying as lesbian. And the thing is, now, where people have the option to be identifying as bi or as some kind of non-binary, or any of those sorts of things, there's still an increasing number of people who are identifying as lesbian. And those people, are definitely lesbian. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where before, well, maybe they were lesbian and maybe they weren't. Or they were almost certainly lesbian, but maybe they were trans, or maybe they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he as concerned about, trans women and men being talked into being women? I mean, you know what I mean? Like the people who identify as male.
No, it's all about women now.
Yeah,
You gotta
but
protect the
does
girls.
does he go on? Has he ever gone on about that? Like, is
Not that
this
I know
part
of.
of women don't know their own minds and therefore can be talked into?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, this is what it seems like to me. This is a paternal kind of an approach to an issue. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because does he go on the same way?
Yeah. Is Holly going? She said, "Thank you, Trish."
Oh no, that's
Or was
about
that
the
for
thing
that
with
reference?
Judith Butler.
Yeah.
Judith Butler is
Oh,
very
yeah.
interesting.
Judith Butler is now, her pronouns are she, her, or they, them.
Yeah.
They, theirs.
Anyway, she's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so anyway, we should go on.
Anyway,
And
yeah,
we should
I'll
continue.
put it on a little bit more. This is
Yeah, don't forget to turn your mic off.
yeah.
And she was asking why, and a lot of other people are asking why, and I'm asking why that is. I want to know what is causing that. Maybe it's all perfect, and we should be celebrating all of it, but maybe it isn't. We know there are at least some people who say that they've been misdiagnosed and wrongly influenced to believe they're trans by a society that encourages it. But is that just like a rare aberration? Or is that happening in larger numbers that explains at least some of this statistical movement? I don't think there's any reasonable way to stigmatize or demonize the asking of that question by claiming that it means anyone who does harbors bigotry or hatred or hostility or transphobia or misogyny. It's just a classic way of trying to shut down debate by destroying the reputations of people who try and participate in it and question dogma rather than swallow, accept, and recite it. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a full supporter yet of the full lesbian, the full trans list of items. There are things that I question. I question at what age someone is capable emotionally and psychologically of doing something as profound as having hormonal therapies, which can be irreversible, or have effects on their mental health, or especially having permanent body-altering surgeries. What is the right age? We ask that question for everything from voting to military service to alcohol.
Okay, now this is the tying straight into the thing that I pinned before about age and so on. He obviously doesn't have a whole lot of notion at what age any people can get access to any of these things.
You got your thing turned on.
I have it. I have got it turned on.
Worries.
And in case anybody's come in, I will repeat that before puberty, no child is given any kind of medical intervention unless they're intersex, and then they get a whole lot of involuntary stuff from birth. But trans kids, they don't get anything until they may hit puberty, and then if they're lucky, if the authorities agree that they are really trans, and this is a whole thing, they have to prove that they are really trans.
Yeah.
And the test is persistence, insistence, and consistence. So this makes it particularly difficult for non-binary people, of course,
Yeah.
who may be a little bit confused with all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not always clear how upset. I mean, not everybody feels so strongly that they insist that they are not the sex they are at age 5 or age 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if they can be accepted as trans, then they might get hormone blockers. And almost all jurisdictions, in most situations, they are not able to get cross-gender hormones until they're 16. And 16 in Australia and I think England is actually the age of consent.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, the age of medical consent is actually when you're competent to make it in Australia. If you can understand the consequences of your decision, you are deemed to be able to make medical decisions for yourself in spite of what your parents want.
Yeah.
And this is particularly good for people who may have health issues and their parents don't want them to get treated because of God or some other thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's he talking about?
Yeah.
He's worried about what age. All this ties into is this ban, these laws that have come into England, and they're trying to replicate elsewhere to prevent people from getting hormone blockers, young people from getting hormone blockers.
Yeah.
And to try and advance the age at which you can get anything. And all that does is force people to go through puberty as the gender that you were assigned.
Yeah.
And that can be disastrous for trans people.
Yeah.
And it causes irrevocable damage.
Yeah, that's right.
So what he's saying is both ignorant and actually damaging, and actually has resulted in laws that take away the rights of trans people.
Yeah.
I mean, no trans person is going to get hormone blockers without the support of their parents.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of parents who are not supportive.
Yeah.
I'll say that. And no trans person is likely to get any kind of medical intervention unless the doctor is convinced. And that
when you say medical
requires,
intervention, you're not talking about surgical intervention. You're talking about
I'm talking about hormones.
hormones. Yeah.
Or hormone blockers. Even hormone blockers, you have to have a doctor prescribe them. You know, they have to be convinced that, you know, there's a good chance that that person is trans.
Anyway, Kim has said something, and Jera has said something too.
Okay, Kim's saying, lesbians are being erased because while more women say they are lesbians, the actual lesbian erasure? Yeah. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And Jera
Jera said,
says,
Dee, I'm fascinated by all the history of the silly political fights between identity groups on the left, and that it continues today makes no sense and is just more division to lessen the power of all. Absolutely. Whenever any group starts giving some other group trouble and making their lives more difficult, that group is less likely to join in solidarity to deal with other issues.
And this is a sort of, this whole transphobic thing is a problem on the left. I've seen that it is a big problem on the left. There's a lot of there's a lot of people
of men,
who say
particularly.
there's a lot of people who say they're leftists who at best are silent because they don't understand it, and at worst are kind of mouthing off, and they don't talk to any trans people, and they're just riding on the wave of this flavor of the month transphobia that's kind of taken over from the homophobia sort of thing. This is the new thing, because you've got to have division, you've got to find a group to otherize in a big way, and trans people are a small group, and they're very vulnerable. And
it's also low-hanging fruit.
It's
in
low-hanging
fruit, culture wars.
Yeah.
And the people who are pushing for the trying to do things to oppress trans people will go after gay people and will go after women's reproductive rights, and almost all of them have those agendas.
It's never in isolation. There are usually other things that go with transphobia.
And it's really sad to see these transphobic women, making alliances with the Christian right, with the Catholic Church, and this kind of stuff, and we see that again and again.
Anyway,
but
the left, a lot of people on the left really need education about this, and this is what I love about Abby Martin and the Empire Files. Like, she's way ahead on this. So is Robbie Martin. There's a few people, Mike Preisner. They've actually had an Empire Files thing on trans rights and stuff, and I don't know what it is, but it's like people have this real resistance, just like even almost as bad as the resistance to veganism. I've found about people
Cornel
on the
West
left.
is very good about that stuff too.
Oh yeah, Cornel West.
He's great.
Now, if Cornel West can get on board and Cornel West is he's like 72, and he's totally on board with trans rights. How is it that there's so many leftists that are much younger than him, like half his age, can't seem to just maybe have a look at it first before kind of going on and thinking that it's some sort of newfangled thing that's just happened in the 21st century, and that there's some sort of trans agenda and all this kind of stuff? Like, seriously, it really saddens me. And it causes a lot of violence. This ignorance causes violence. Anyway, shall we go on with this? Yeah.
All consumption to everything else. Why shouldn't we be asking that question of when is someone emotionally capable of making those choices? Is it 10? Is it 13? Is it 16? Is it 18? And there are children, 16 and even 15, getting things like mastectomies, where their breasts are being removed because they say they're trans boys. There are clinics that specialize in it. There are courts that allow it. Is that really an age at which those kind of decisions can be made? Of course, we have not just the right, but the duty to ask that without being accused of being transphobic. I also wonder whether we do have a scientific consensus yet on whether.
I just want to quickly say it's extremely unusual for any surgeon to agree to any kind of surgery, including mastectomies, before a person is at least 18.
Yeah.
Basically, they won't agree. The surgeons won't agree.
There are protocols that allow trans women who were assigned the male sex at birth to fairly participate in sporting competition alongside cis women. Martina Navratilova was kicked out of LGBT organizations. The tennis star, who was such a pioneer in women's sports, because 2 years ago or a year and a half, she asked that question, what should be required before we allow trans women to participate in sports, and ultimately concluded it's never fair for someone who goes through puberty as a male. And
okay, this whole sports question, he raises this one too.
Yeah.
As his issue with trans people. And of course, this is the one that Tulsi Gabbard's trying to defund any public school if they allow trans kids to participate in sports. And I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, if you have a trans kid who's maybe 10, who has socially transitioned, who is in no sense had any kind of medical intervention at all, and is 10 or is 7, and you let them do PE, under Tulsi Gabbard's bill, you'd have that school defunded. And that's how ridiculous it is. And I just want to say, with the whole sports thing, it's been a major issue in international sports for nearly 100 years, the whole gender issue. And they have all kinds of protocols. And mostly what they deal with is intersex people, because there's actually a much higher proportion of intersex people in women's sports than in the general public. And they've had all kinds of rules about genetics, and then they gave that up, and testosterone levels, and that's where Duty Chand took them to court and won, and then Castor Semenya took them to court and I think lost, and they're going back and forth with that. At the same time, nobody looks at the testosterone levels of men. Actually, one study did and found that there were a number of people who had testosterone levels in the female range, who were male sports figures. Anyway, international sports is trying to work that out, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with biological sex. They use different criterion. They've given up the biological sex thing years ago.
Develops the muscle mass and all of the hormonal structure of the male body, even if they take hormonal therapies to weaken their body or to turn it into a truly female body to compete with cis females. Whether that's
Kim's
really fair, she thinks it's not fair. A lot of people think it's not fair. I don't think it's unfair. I don't think the proof there is that it's unfair, but I also don't think we have a scientific consensus yet on what is required to make it fair, and I want to see that. I'm not somebody who believes that trans women should be banned from professional sports or high school sports. I just think that the scientific consensus has to be extremely clear that it can be done fairly to everybody, and I'm not sure that it's there yet. I have questions about it, and that doesn't make me or anybody else with that question transphobic. And then the other question I have finally is, what does it mean to be non-binary? I see people all the time who claim that status out of nowhere and then who suddenly expect to be treated not just the same as people who have gone through their whole lives as gay men or gay women, but as more oppressed even. There was a New York Times article I found very fascinating from about...
This is just more of that oppression points.
3 months ago, about how leftists who are born into very rich families and have trust funds are trying to give away their wealth because they feel guilty about having it, which is a perfectly noble thing to do. They often try and find how the wealth was acquired and then give it to the group that they believe was oppressed in order to acquire it. And one of the people who they highlighted was a person named Price Dellenhunt. And the New York Times referred to Price as MX Delahunt because Price has claimed non-binary status. Now, what does that mean? They had a picture of Price Delahunt, and this is what Price Delahunt looks like. Now, I don't question the authenticity of the non-binary identity that Price has said. It's probably hard to be a white, straight male in very leftist spaces, even if you're giving your money away, but especially if you're from a rich family. Saying you're non-binary, being asked to be addressed as, I think it's pronounced MX, not Mr. or Ms. because you're non-binary, is probably helpful. It's probably true in a lot of cases. I have no doubt about that. But what does it mean for this person to claim they're non-binary when they go through life looking like that and being from a rich family? What are the experiences?
Okay, so here's where he's having a go specifically at non-binary people.
Yeah.
With that picture. I mean, if a person is non-binary, it's how they identify.
Yeah.
If they're saying they want to use they, them pronouns or mix as a title, well, they're probably going to get grief for that. They're going to get people who give them trouble for that, or not. But they're probably not going to get any points for that. And if a person is non-binary, they don't necessarily need to look androgynous. Yeah, they can look however they want, but the way you look, and anyway, ContraPoints did quite a good and somewhat controversial video about this, where she talks about the fact that how you identify is something internal, but how you appear to people is going to govern their response to you to a very large extent. And he's probably, or they are probably going to be responded to as male. And they may be non-binary, but they're likely to be responded to as male if that's the way they look. But who's to say that picture is a current picture? That's a picture of them, but is that how they look now? Is that how they look always? Yeah. You know, people can shave beards. People can change their hair length. People do those things.
Yeah.
How do you know what that person looks like most of the time?
Yeah.
In any case, that's their problem.
Yeah.
That's their issue.
Yeah.
And to sit there and use that and kind of question, kind of slyly question, and use that as an example for non-binary people, and then connect it with making oppression points. He's basically invalidating that. He's saying, here's basically Glenn Greenwald is saying, here's this guy. He looks just like a white man.
Yeah.
And he's calling himself non-binary for oppression points because he's got some psychological damage, and making some conclusion about non-binary people from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you want to know about non-binary people, I would suggest Luxander's site.
Yeah, I put a link.
They're very interesting.
I put a link to that.
And Trish has put a link on that.
I put there's about 4 or 5 or 6 links actually now.
Yeah.
In the live chat, people can check
but
out.
But Luxander has done some very interesting posts.
Yeah.
About being non-binary.
Yeah.
And is well worth a look at.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to stop here. I won't go to the end. He just carries on.
Does he not say something worthwhile to talk
well,
about?
I don't think he says. I don't think he said anything worthwhile for a while.
Yeah.
I think he just carries on a bit more like this, and how he's not really transphobic, and he isn't really. Doesn't really want to, but he's just asking questions.
Right.
He's only just asking questions.
Yes, he's fascinated.
And it's something we should ask. We should have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
He just doesn't want to actually have a conversation.
No. He's putting
doesn't
out.
actually want to ask the question and do any investigation.
Yeah.
He just wants to throw these things up,
Yeah.
like somebody throwing dust into a windstorm.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this echoes exactly the kind of narratives that the transphobes
Yeah.
are putting out,
A
and
cisgendered
which the
gay
Murdoch
man.
press
Yeah.
and the mainstream press are repeating ad nauseum.
Yeah, a cisgendered gay man yapping on and on about this, and no trans person in sight.
Yeah,
You know, it's
Yeah.
just sort of like really unfortunate.
yeah.
Anyway, so is there anything else you wanted to say? Is
there
there anybody
is
wanted to
something
make
else I
any
wanted to
comments before we
say.
go?
There was one more thing I wanted to say. This is something that a lot of TERFs use, as long as we're on the issue of statistics. And this is the referrals to the Tavistock Clinic in England. And the NHS Gender Identity Development Service, the GIDS, is a nationally operated health clinic specializing in working with children with gender identity issues, including gender dysphoria. Although based at a Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust site, it is commissioned by the NHS, that's the National Health Service England, and takes referrals from across the United Kingdom. So these are referrals from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, from Wales, from Scotland, and from England. It is the only gender identity clinic for people under 18 in the UK and is the subject of much controversy. It certainly is. So let's look at 2009. 2009, they had 15 adolescents who were assigned female at birth and 24 assigned who were male assigned at birth. 2 children, that's under 12, who were female at birth, assigned female at birth, and 10 AMAB, or assigned male at birth people. In other words, they just had really a handful. When you think that this is the only gender clinic in all of the UK and all of the referrals have to go here, they've got, 39, 49, 51 people. In 2009, they had 51 referrals
Yeah.
out of England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
51, yeah.
Um,
That's not many, really.
not out of England, out of the UK, out of the entire UK.
Right, yeah.
There's almost none,
Yeah.
really. And that's all that were referred. And I will also want to point out that a referral doesn't necessarily end up being somebody who they conclude is trans. That's somebody who is referred to see if they're trans and if they need any kind of treatment.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so by 2016, the numbers have jumped quite substantially, from 15 adolescent AFAB people have gone up to 1,071. And transphobes use this to say there has been an explosion in the number of trans girls, and for trans children under 12, it went from 2 to 138, and that is a massive increase. It is. They point out that for children assigned female at birth, it is an increase of 6,900%.
Yeah, yeah.
For adolescents, that's 13 to 18, it's an increase in 7,140%. And they put that percentage point out there. In other words, instead of saying 71 times.
Yeah.
because it sounds
Yeah,
scarier.
yeah, yeah, sure.
And they can say that, and it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
there's an overwhelming number of people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. A lot of people were referred, and due to the reduced funding and increased referrals, the average wait time was 2 years from referral to the first appointment.
Yeah, right.
So if you were referred because
Yeah.
you had gender issues,
2 years
it
before
took
you even see
2
anybody.
years
Yeah, yeah,
before you would have an appointment.
yeah, really.
And that's before in order for them to start a process of deciding whether you were trans
Yeah,
and you got any kind of help.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it was
How long
kind of
is
pretty
it?
hopeless.
How long is it here, Didi?
What?
How long is it here in Australia?
Well, there's still quite a bit of problems here. I think for Tasmania, there's all kinds of problems. I think
I'm
things
just
have
wondering
changed
how
a little
long.
bit.
How
I think
long?
it can be several months.
Several months,
like-
but not 2 years.
It's not 2 years,
Yeah.
no. I think it can be like 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
But what happened with the Tavistock clinic is, in fact, a lot of the parents were so distressed and the children were so distressed, they ended up going to Europe or the United States so they could get hormone blockers,
Mm,
because that's what a lot of those people wanted.
mm,
And after that, they started trying to speed things up a little bit because so many people were just leaving the country rather than going through the
yeah.
NHS scheme.
Yeah.
And there were some issues about that people in Tavistock thought they were not taking enough time.
Yeah. Right.
And that fed a bit of a scandal.
Anyway.
But I would like to say one more thing
Yeah.
about the numbers there.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. So if there are 1,071 people who were referred, who were adolescents between 13 and 18,
Yeah.
that number is out of 5.5 million people in the UK
Right.
in that age group.
Right.
So it's 1,000 people out of 5.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the huge inundation
Yeah.
of trans people.
Yeah. Really.
For the young people,
Excuse me.
the 138 is out of 6.1 million people.
Yeah. Right.
And that is 0.00007% of the population.
Mm.
It's almost nothing.
Yes.
So to sit there and claim on the basis of, oh my God, it's increased, by 7,000%, and ignore the fact that it is a fraction, it is less than 1% of 1%
Yeah.
of the population, is to make incredible exaggerations and use statistics disgustingly.
Yeah. 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 Really.
But the transphobes will use those figures, and they will use the scariest percentage points they can.
Yeah. Really.
Okay, since we were on the subject of statistics, I just wanted to throw that one in.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoops.
I don't really have much more to say.
Yeah. So we sort of, I suppose we've gone through that with a fine-tooth comb, and that's good, because this needs to be focused on and pushed back against the sort of the pushing forward of the TERF narrative, which is really, really damaging, and it ends up causing violence to trans people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't, honestly, this is as befuddling to me in many ways as the constant the homophobia and stuff that went on and people carrying on and on and on and on about it, and now that it's trans people, and it just gets so, like, I've known trans people now for like 30 years, and I cannot believe that this is going on at this point in time. But anyway, it just is, and it's good that, you know, and that's why when we do these live streams about this issue, or we do a video about this issue, we tend to spend a lot of time talking about it, and Dee Dee's got a lot of knowledge about it, and so we talk about it, you know, fairly thoroughly, because it needs that, because there's
a lot of misinformation out there.
So much misinformation,
huge amounts.
And it's just sort of, it's dangerous and it's tiresome, and I wish Glenn Greenwald would find some other hobby, something that he's fascinated in that isn't this, because he doesn't know what he's talking about through most of it, and he's really tapping into the wrong narratives that are really, really basically kind of hateful and bigoted.
The fact that he sees this, given all of the issues on the planet right now, given the wars, the imperialism, the
climate crisis,
the move towards shadow governments by TNCs, to create non-elected governing and regulatory bodies that are run by transnational corporations. Given the censorship that's happening, the huge disparity in wealth, the racism, all of the rest of this stuff, it's amazing that he decides to focus on trans people.
Really.
And take a stance where, rather than investigate or talk to trans people, he's just repeating turf
and
narratives.
If people are on his Twitter page, they should actually suggest, this is what I've done, suggest to him, why doesn't he interview a trans person about this, instead of relying on these turfs to inform him. You know, if people can keep repeating that over and over again to him, maybe he might. And if he doesn't, then you really have to start to really wonder about that. Is it a bad faith sort of position he has? And if he keeps going like this, I will definitely be thinking that. I mean, I'm kind of starting to verge that way anyway. But anyhow,
I'm very sad about it, because I've always had good feelings about.
Well, there's other problems with him. The China, his position, his strange things he says about China and things like that. I don't know. He's going off the rails with a few things. But anyhow, so thanks so much for watching, and we appreciate it. And I hope that anybody who hasn't visited this channel before will check out the playlist, check out the various playlists, because they're all related. All this otherization is all related and causes violence, racism, sexism, heterosexism, speciesism, all of those different ones, ableism, classism, the whole thing. They're all related. They all cause violence. They're all faces of the same ignorance. And where you have one, you will have all kinds. So anyway, we'll wrap it up here, shall we, Dee Dee?
Yeah.
And thanks so much for watching.
Thank you so much for
thanks, Holly,
coming and listening
Jera,
to
Odin,
our stuff. Jera and Holly, it's so
Adam,
lovely to see you.
Whoever's left
Adam,
here, and
Kim,
anybody else who's lurking.
So nice to see you all.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up here. So thanks, Dee Dee, for sharing your knowledge about this. And till next time, we keep well. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section, and maybe we can talk about that next time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye for now.